My name is Rebecca Lane. I'm 55 years old. I was a senior accountant for over 3 decades. Numbers never lied to me. People often did. I raised my son Ethan alone after my husband passed. And for the past 6 years, I've invested not just money, but everything I had left. Into his future, into his home, into a family I thought I was still part of. It was a Thursday afternoon in December when I brought over a batch of my spiced ginger cookies, Ethan's childhood favorite. I thought we'd sit, talk, maybe plan Christmas dinner like we used to. I even wore the burgundy scarf he gave me years ago, back when he still thought his mother was the most important woman in his life. Their house smelled like vanilla candles and polished marble, the kind of sterile warmth that costs money to fake. The tree in the corner must have been 10 feet tall, strung with gold ornaments. Not a single handmade memory. Not the ones we'd made. I noticed the picture frames had changed. The old photo of me, Ethan, and his dad. Gone. Replaced by a perfect portrait of Ethan and Sophie, arms around her parents, smiling in aspen. Still, I smiled. I thought maybe this year I could make the turkey. The one your father used to love. Remember the pecan stuffing? Ethan shifted on the leather sofa. His fingers twitched against the seam of his jeans. I knew that look. He was bracing. He cleared his throat. Mom, you won't be joining us this year. I blinked. What do you mean? He looked at the table, then back at me, his jaw tight. Sophie's parents are coming in from Chicago and, well, it's only for family. There it was, word for word. You won't be joining us for Christmas. It's only for family. I didn't cry. I didn't flinch. I looked around that room, the velvet drapes I'd paid for when Sophie said she needed privacy, the oak dining table I'd financed when they hosted their first Thanksgiving, the wine fridge, the imported chandelier, the damn espresso machine no one ever used. All of it. I bought it. Every shiny inch of this house bore my fingerprints. But apparently I didn't belong. I stood, smoothed my coat. My fingers brushed a small silver bell hanging on the bottom branch of the tree. Ethan picked that out when he was 8. We'd found it at a holiday fair, and he said it would help Santa find our house faster. He didn't even notice me touch it. All right, I said calmly. I understand. Mom, he started. But I was already walking toward the door, my hand on the knob. I turned just slightly. Tell Sophie's parents, I said. Happy holidays. The wind was sharp when I stepped outside. It bit through my scarf. I could still smell the cinnamon from those cookies in my bag. Behind me, the door clicked shut. Not slammed, just firm, final. I got in my car, set the cookies on the passenger seat, and turned the key. The engine rumbled to life. I pulled out of their perfect driveway, lined with fairy lights. Not one of them felt warm. An hour later, they started screaming when the phone rang. I didn't go home right away. I drove. Not aimlessly, not exactly. Just far enough to let the air shake loose the ache in my chest. Street after street glowed with holiday lights. Families gathered inside, laughing silhouettes moving behind frosted windows. I saw a father lifting his daughter to hang an ornament. I remembered doing that for Ethan, the year we couldn't afford a real tree and built one out of cardboard. At a red light, I pulled out my phone, opened my banking app. There it was. The monthly $3,200 mortgage transfer to Ethan and Sophie's account, still set to autopay, still draining me like clockwork. 6 years, 72 payments, $230,400. I scrolled through the ledger, kitchen remodel, furniture upgrades, loan co-signatures, even their wedding rehearsal dinner. All in my name. I turned off the radio, parked outside my condo, climbed the stairs slower than usual. Inside, the lights were off. I didn't flip the switch, just stood in the dark for a minute. The silence wasn't empty, it was clean. I set the cookies on the counter, poured myself a glass of water. Then I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and logged into the mortgage service portal. I canceled the automatic transfer. Done. No more loans, no more favors, no more enabling a family that decided I wasn't family. There wasn't anger in my chest, just something cooler, sharper. Relief, maybe, like cutting away a rope that had been pulling me under. I closed the laptop, let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. The phone buzzed. Sophie, I stared at the name, let it ring twice, then I picked up. "Hi, Rebecca," she said, her voice too chipper to be sincere. "Quick thing, we need someone to pick up my parents at the airport tomorrow. Their flight gets in around 2. You're free, right?" My grip tightened on the phone. "I thought I was in family," I said softly. There was a pause. "Well, I mean, we're still, of course you're. Look, they'll be at Carousel 3. Alaska Air. You know where to go." I paused, smiled. "Sure," I said. "I'll take care of it." And then I hung up. I didn't set a reminder. I didn't set an alarm. I poured myself a second glass of water. And for the first time in 6 years, I didn't go to bed wondering what bill I'd need to cover tomorrow, because I already knew. It wasn't going to be mine. And that phone call tomorrow, oh, they'd remember it, and they'd scream. Just like they screamed 1 hour after they told me I didn't belong. That was the moment the story began to change, and I was done playing the part of the generous fool. I used to tell myself it was love, that every check I wrote, every bill I covered, every upgrade I paid for, it all came from love. And maybe in the beginning, that was true. After my husband died, it felt like the ground beneath me had shifted. Ethan was only 22 at the time, fresh out of college and drowning in student loans. He had ambition, sure, but no capital, no credit history, and no one else but me. So I stepped in, like any mother would. I remember the day I sold part of my shares in the company I helped build from the ground up. A quiet Tuesday. I wore a navy blouse and a brave smile. I didn't even flinch when the broker told me how much I'd be losing in long-term returns. I used $47,000 from that sale to cover Ethan and Sophie's down payment on the house. They cried when I handed them the check. I cried too. I thought we were building something together. That house became my second mortgage, literally. When Ethan lost his job a year later, I refinanced my own condo to keep his mortgage current. Then came the kitchen remodel. Sophie said the old counters weren't functional for her cooking blog. So I paid $18,000 for marble tops and a 6-burner stove she used twice. Next, it was the living room furniture. The sofa was too flat. Then the rugs were too dark. Sophie said they made her anxious. I covered another $12,000. I bought their curtain sets, silk, imported. Paid off their wedding loans when Sophie's father suddenly had a liquidity issue. I even covered their first IVF consultation because Ethan was too proud to admit his insurance didn't cover it. In total, I stopped counting at $230,000, but I didn't resent it, not then, because I believed I was investing in something unshakable, family. Still, there were cracks I ignored, subtle shifts in tone, the way Sophie's face would tighten when I offered financial advice, how she'd say, "Thanks, Rebecca," instead of, "Thanks, Mom." One night, after I'd paid their property taxes because they were in between paychecks, I overheard a call on speakerphone. Sophie was in the kitchen, chopping herbs for a salad she never finished. Ethan was sitting on the couch, scrolling on his phone. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I'd just come to drop off groceries. But then I heard her say, clear as day, "It's not like I'm ungrateful, but she inserts herself into everything, always acting like this is her house, just because she helped a little with the mortgage. A little." I stood frozen in the doorway, holding 2 bags of groceries, organic, because Sophie said she was cutting preservatives. My arms were numb, but my chest hurt worse. I never brought it up. I never told Ethan I heard. I just smiled like always, unloaded the bags, and left early. Because somewhere deep down, I was afraid. Afraid that if I stopped giving, I'd stop mattering. And maybe I already had. Money is a strange currency in families. It buys loyalty in the short term, but resentment grows like mold in the corners. The more I gave, the more I was treated like a line item. Not a mother, not a person. Just a faucet. I think, the moment I canceled that mortgage payment, something unclogged in me. For 6 years, I believed I was helping my son stand on his feet. Now I realized I'd only helped them climb over me, and they hadn't even looked back. The truth is, I didn't mind spending the money. What hurt was knowing I'd paid for the right to be excluded. That every dollar had been exchanged for silence, distance, and a fake smile across a perfect dining table. But they weren't going to smile for long. Not once the consequences started arriving. Not once I reminded them who, exactly, had built the foundation they were so eager to pretend didn't exist. And I was just getting started. There's a silver bell hanging on the bottom branch of Ethan and Sophie's Christmas tree. You wouldn't notice it if you weren't looking for it. It's small, about the size of a golf ball, and slightly tarnished, its shine dulled by time and fingerprints that once belonged to smaller hands. That bell is 27 years old. It was Christmas Eve, and Ethan was 8. The year Denver got hit with a freak snowstorm that blanketed the whole city in silence. I remember it like it just happened. The way the snow fell sideways under the streetlight, the way the cold bit through the cracks in our old apartment windows, and the way Ethan couldn't sleep because he was afraid Santa wouldn't find us in the snow. That night, we'd built a makeshift tree out of stacked cardboard boxes wrapped in green construction paper. We didn't have money for a real one, or decorations, so we made them, cut stars out of foil, hung popcorn strings across the top, and then Ethan, in his red flannel pajamas with the 2 short sleeves, pulled something from his coat pocket. It was a bell, just a cheap metal ornament we'd picked up together at a church market a week before. I thought he'd forgotten it. He held it up with a grin missing a front tooth and said, "If we hang this, Santa will hear it and find us first." I laughed. I cried. We tied it to the top of the cardboard tree with a shoelace. It was the only thing that made a sound that night. One soft chime that echoed into the stillness. Then we sat under that tree, just the 2 of us, drinking cocoa made from the last packet in the cupboard. And before he fell asleep with his head on my lap, he whispered, "Promise we'll always be together. You and me, Mom, no matter what." I promised. That bell followed us through every Christmas since. Real trees, fake ones, apartments, townhomes, houses. No matter where we lived, it went up last. Our tradition. Ethan would climb the stool, I'd hold his waist like when he was a kid, and he'd find the perfect branch, usually somewhere near the bottom where the bell could swing. Even when he went off to college, he came home for Christmas just to hang it. And when he got engaged to Sophie, he asked to take it with him. I let him, because I thought it meant something to him. Maybe it did. Back then. But now, standing in their pristine living room, I saw the bell again, and it felt hollow. It was buried among expensive glass ornaments, barely visible, shoved toward the back. It didn't have the shoelace anymore, just a sleek silver hook. And it wasn't ringing, not because it couldn't, but because no one bothered to make it sing. That's what Sophie's house was. Quiet, curated, untouched by memory. There were no fingerprints on anything, no marks on the wood from Ethan's toy trucks, no smudges on the windows from when we used to tape up snowflake cutouts. Everything had a place, and apparently I didn't. The day I brought those ginger cookies and heard Ethan say, "It's only for family," I looked right past him, right at that silver bell. I wondered if he even remembered where it came from, if he remembered the cardboard tree, the cocoa, the promise, or if all of it had been swallowed by granite countertops and scented candles. I didn't cry in that moment, but later, alone in my condo, I took down the plastic bin of old ornaments I hadn't touched in years. Inside, I found the faded photo of that Christmas, Ethan, grinning in front of our green cardboard tower, holding that bell up like it was a trophy. The photo was wrinkled at the edges, a bit torn on one side, but the joy in it? That was real. That was something no designer centerpiece or curated Instagram post could manufacture. I held it against my chest and closed my eyes. Sometimes the smallest things, the ones you almost forget, are the ones that hold the loudest echoes. That bell wasn't just an ornament. It was a promise, one he had forgotten. But I hadn't. And it was time to make some noise. December 23rd. It was a Friday, bright and cold, with the kind of sun that tricks you into thinking it's warmer than it is. I was at home, wrapped in a knitted shawl Maria Thompson gave me last winter. The one with the loose thread near the hem that I still hadn't fixed. I had no plans that day, and no one expecting me. For once, I liked it that way. I set a pot of water to boil and opened the crossword from yesterday's paper. 7 across. Delayed gratification, 12 letters. I smiled. Postponement. At exactly 2 p.m., I poured my first cup of Earl Grey and let it steep while I sliced an apple. My phone buzzed once, then again, Then a third time. I didn't reach for it. Instead, I turned on a classical playlist and sat at the small kitchen table, the sun stretching through the blinds like warm fingers across my face. Out at Spokane International, Sophie and her parents were, no doubt, waiting at baggage claim carousel 3. Alaska Air Flight 447 had landed on time. I'd checked. They were probably scanning the crowd, expecting me, because I'd said I'd take care of it. And technically, I had. I took care of myself. By 2:15, my phone had rung 5 more times. I turned it over, face down, and focused on my crossword again. Somewhere in that cavernous airport terminal, Richard Hill was muttering about incompetence, and Clara was clutching her designer coat tighter around her as she searched for a familiar face. Sophie, I imagined, was pacing. Her voice would be sharp. She was always sharper when she didn't get her way. I could see it clearly in my mind, like watching a play I'd seen a dozen times. By 3 o'clock, I'd finished my tea and moved on to tidying the silverware drawer. Not because it needed it, but because I liked the sound of the metal clicking neatly into place. By 3:30, they were probably outside, trying to hail a cab in the freezing wind, dialing Uber and finding out there were surge fees. By 3:45, the pounding started. Not knocking, pounding. A full-fisted assault on my front door that made the frame shudder. I waited, counted to 5, then opened it. There they were. Richard Hill stood closest, face red and shiny. Clara behind him, looking as if she'd walked through a hurricane made of disapproval. And Sophie, last, cheeks flushed, eyeliner smudged, breath visible in the cold. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Richard shouted, barging past me like a man used to taking up space. "You left us there," Clara added, not even waiting to be invited inside. "Like animals, at an airport." Sophie slammed the door behind her. "You humiliated us," she said, voice low but vibrating. "My parents were stranded for hours. I didn't move, I just watched them, one by one." "You told me I wasn't family," I said evenly. "Why would you expect me to act like I was?" "You said you'd pick them up," Sophie snapped. "You promised." "I said I'd take care of it." "You petty, selfish woman," Clara hissed. "This is elder abuse." I looked her straight in the eye. "No, Clara. This is boundaries. It's not something you're used to." Richard stepped forward. "You've made a huge mistake. Do you know who I am in this town?" "Yes," I said. "I know exactly who you think you are." I opened the door again. The cold came rushing in, sharp and clean. "Get out," Sophie blinked. "What?" I said, "Get out. My house. My rules." They didn't move, so I added, "Or I can call someone who will move you." Richard's nostrils flared. Clara gasped. Sophie's mouth opened, then closed. They left. No slamming, no final word. Just the sound of heels on my front step and the quietest door click I'd ever heard. I stood there for a moment longer, breathing. The air tasted better somehow, like peace. 3 days later, I saw my own face staring back at me from page 3 of the Spokane Chronicle. I hadn't even finished my first sip of coffee when the headline caught my eye. Local woman abandons elderly couple at airport amid holiday storm. My hands went still around the mug. For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. I blinked, once, then twice, as if trying to wake from a dream I hadn't meant to fall into. Below the headline was a photo, me, 5 years younger, taken from an old business article on community philanthropy. The irony was almost poetic. I read the opening paragraph out loud, just to hear how ridiculous it sounded. On December 23rd, retired accountant Rebecca Lane left Richard and Clara Hill, both in their 60s, stranded for over 3 hours at Spokane International Airport. The couple, visiting family for the holidays, reported feeling abandoned and unsafe as a winter storm warning swept through the region. Winter storm warning. It had been 46 degrees and sunny that day. I hadn't seen a single snowflake. But the article continued, weaving a carefully curated picture of neglect and emotional instability. There were quotes from Clara saying she feared for her health and felt humiliated, like a stray dog waiting for scraps. Richard, of course, provided the legal flavor. We were shocked by Rebecca's erratic behavior. One day she's offering to help, the next she ghosts us. It makes you wonder if everything's okay up here. He tapped his temple, I imagined. just for added effect. Then came the kicker. A subtle but effective line about concerns raised by unnamed sources about Rebecca Lane's mental state following the death of her husband and her withdrawal from social circles. I sat down, not out of weakness, but to keep from shattering the coffee cup in my hand. It was deliberate, surgical. I'd worked in finance long enough to recognize a strategic takedown when I saw one. This wasn't just about embarrassing me. This was about discrediting me. Because Richard knew what I'd done, he knew I'd pulled the plug on the mortgage payments. And if I went public with that, if I showed proof that I'd been bankrolling their life for 6 years, he'd need to get ahead of it, control the narrative, plant doubt, frame me as unstable, unreliable, emotionally fragile. Because that way, when I responded, if I responded, it would look like damage control, like denial. I reread the article, this time with a red pen. I circled every fabrication, every exaggeration, every manipulative half-truth. Elderly couple? Clara was 61 and still ran 3 charity committees. Winter storm? The weather app said partly cloudy. Mentally unstable? No one had ever said that. Not once in my entire adult life. I flipped to the byline, Patricia Moore, lifestyle editor. I didn't recognize the name, but I didn't need to. Someone had handed her the story, probably with a bow on it. I opened my laptop and started digging. Within 15 minutes, I found the connection. Patricia had recently done a feature on local banking retirees. Guess who was quoted extensively? Richard Hill. It was too clean to be coincidence. He'd used the favor, cashed it in like a poker chip. I closed my laptop, leaned back, and let the silence fill the room. I should have felt furious, or broken, or scared, but I didn't. I felt focused. I'd spent 6 years being quiet, polite, generous. I paid bills with a smile, bit my tongue when insulted, let people walk past me like I wasn't standing in my own shoes. But they'd made one critical mistake. They tried to erase me publicly, and if it's public they wanted, public they would get. This wasn't about picking up anyone at an airport anymore. This wasn't about one Christmas dinner. This was about reclaiming a story they thought they could rewrite without me. I stood up, carried the newspaper to my desk, and laid it beside a thick manila folder. Inside were 6 years of receipts, wire transfers, mortgage payments, all under my name. And on top of that stack, I placed one thing, a photograph. Ethan, age 8, holding a silver bell in one hand, his other wrapped around my waist, snow falling softly around us, our cardboard Christmas tree glowing in the background. That was the last time my son ever looked at me like I was magic. They could have their narrative, for now. But the truth was patient, and it was my turn to write. That afternoon, I opened the drawer I hadn't touched since Mark's funeral, third one down in the office cabinet, where I kept old tax documents, faded receipts, and financial records so organized it would make the IRS blush. I used to be proud of this system. Now it felt like the drawer was mocking me. I pulled out the first folder marked Ethan, mortgage support. A dozen wire transfer receipts fell out. Neat rows of dates and amounts. $3,200 every month, without fail, for 6 years. I did the math, again, just to be sure. $3,200 times 12 months times 6 years equals $230,400, not including the original down payment, $47,000 from my share of the sale after I stepped down as managing partner. I didn't even blink when I transferred it. Sophie was pregnant then, and Ethan had just lost his job at the city planning office. They were young, starting out. I remembered thinking, if I can help build their foundation, they'll remember it forever. They remembered, just not in the way I hoped. I found another folder labeled Home Renovation, Kitchen Upgrades, $7,800. New floors, $9,200. Drapes from that boutique Sophie loved, $3,400. The custom sectional they just had to have, $5,000, plus delivery. I kept flipping. There were Venmo screenshots of transfers for groceries, babysitting, even dog grooming. I had paid for emergency plumbing, for the nursery wallpaper, for Ethan's dental work after he cracked a molar and said insurance wouldn't cover it. I had itemized all of it, like a good accountant, like a mother who thought it meant love. I started stacking the papers, lining them up edge to edge, date to date, letting the cold weight of numbers replace the warm fog of emotion. When I was finished, I had tallied $264,825.37. I leaned back in my chair, closed my eyes, and for a moment I felt nothing, not even anger, just the echo of silence from people I thought loved me. It wasn't the money, I'd earned that money, I could earn more. It was the intentional deception, the way they took smiling, the way Sophie once laughed about your little charity tax write-offs, the way Ethan said, "We'll pay you back eventually," like it was a joke we both agreed on. It wasn't a joke to me. The deeper I dug, the more I found. Photos of Sophie on Instagram, smiling next to the marble island in the kitchen I'd paid for. Hashtags like Sakrauer Forever Home and Blessed and Grateful, which now stung like vinegar on an open wound. But then, as I pulled up my email archives, one message stopped me cold. It was sent to my inbox by mistake. From Richard Hill to Patricia Moore. Subject: Background on Rebecca Lane. The body of the email was short, cold, ruthless. Attached is a brief on Rebecca's recent behavior. Note her mental health struggles post-widowhood, financial withdrawal from family events, and possible instability. She may react unpredictably if this article runs, so be sure to frame it as concern rather than criticism. Attached was a file I hadn't opened the first time. I did now. It was a PDF, 2 pages, detailed evidence that I'd been mentally unfit, including quotes Richard had fabricated about me withdrawing from church, isolating myself, and expressing paranoid delusions. None of it was true, none of it. He'd been planning the article long before the airport incident, long before I canceled the mortgage. It wasn't a reaction, it was a strategy. I put the paper down, suddenly aware of how fast my heart was beating. Richard Hill wasn't just rude or arrogant or controlling. He was dangerous, and he had power, or at least he used to. Because if he thought I would shrink away, hide behind teacups and crossword puzzles for the rest of my life, he hadn't been paying attention. I wasn't a victim. I was a woman with documentation, with numbers, with cold, hard truth. And numbers don't lie. I took the stack of papers, receipts, and the email, and slid them into a leather portfolio. I zipped it up slowly, deliberately. It was time to stop mourning my role in their life and start defending my name. I knew I couldn't do this alone, not just because of the scope of it, but because the moment you decide to stand up against your own family, every step has to be precise, documented, legal, and above all, undeniable. That's when I remembered Marian Torres. We met years ago at a conference for financial literacy among widows and single mothers. Marian wasn't just a lawyer. She was the kind of woman who read abuse not only in bruises or threats, but in patterns, in power plays, in dollar signs. She had handled everything from inheritance theft to quiet embezzlement by adult children. So I called her, left a voicemail. Short, careful. "Hi Marian, it's Rebecca Lane. I think it's time I finally needed your help," she called. Back less than an hour later. Her voice was calm, professional. She asked one question. "Are you safe?" "Yes," I said, "but I'm tired of being quiet." 2 days later, I sat across from her in her office, a neat sunlit space with glass shelves full of legal books and photos of women hugging her at courtroom exits. I handed over my portfolio. Every receipt, every wire transfer, every annotated note I'd made. She took her time reading. Her expression didn't change until she reached the email from Richard. She leaned back slowly. "Rebecca," she said, "this isn't just morally wrong. It may constitute coercive financial abuse under state law, especially given your role as a widow and the pressure dynamics involved." Her words didn't bring comfort. They brought clarity. We spent hours drafting the initial demand letter. Marian insisted on using neutral but firm language, words that left no room for evasion. No theatrics, just facts. "Dear Mr. Ethan Lane and Mrs. Sophie Lane, as of the attached summary, the total amount of funds contributed by Ms. Rebecca Lane toward your personal and household expenses amounts to $264,825.37. These funds were given without a legal framework for repayment, but under the repeated assurance and implication of mutual familial support, which has since been breached through defamatory action and exclusion. This letter serves as a formal demand for the acknowledgement of said debt, the return of funds within 30 days, or a willingness to settle through structured arbitration. Failure to respond will result in civil proceedings. Sincerely, Marian Torres, attorney at law. It was clean, precise, powerful. But what got to me most wasn't the threat of court. It was the fact that, for the first time in years, someone had named what I was going through for what it truly was: financial abuse. I left her office with a copy of the demand letter in one hand and a flash drive with backup files in the other. At home, I placed them both inside a brown envelope. Then I walked over to the cabinet in my hallway, the one where I kept holiday ornaments, and opened the small velvet box at the back. Inside was the silver bell, tarnished slightly now, but still beautiful, still inscribed with that tiny EL8 on the base. I held it for a long time. The memory was still so vivid, snow falling outside, Ethan's tiny hands cupped around mine as we tied the red ribbon, his voice whispering, "We'll always be together, right, Mom?" I laid the bell gently on top of the envelope, not as a decoration, as a witness. That bell had rung in our promises. Now it would watch as I reclaimed what those promises had cost me. Marian and I chose the delivery date intentionally. December 25th. Not out of cruelty, but because there's something poetic about telling the truth on the very day I was told I didn't belong. That morning, while they unwrapped gifts and posted filtered photos of smiling faces, the courier would hand-deliver a letter they couldn't ignore. I wasn't looking for revenge. I wasn't even looking for an apology. I just wanted them to understand. They couldn't rewrite the story of our family and expect me to disappear from the margins. Not anymore. I chose the green dress, not the black one, the one that screams mourning, but the deep forest green with the high neckline. My late husband always said it made my eyes look stronger. And tonight, I needed every ounce of strength I had. The roads were quiet on Christmas night. Most people were already at their destinations, unwrapping gifts or carving turkeys. But I drove with purpose, a silent calm pulsing through me. I wasn't arriving as a guest. I wasn't coming as a mother. I was walking into the very nest where they thought I would never set foot again. Ethan's house glowed like a magazine cover. Warm yellow lights lined the edges of the roof. The wreath was perfectly centered, and through the large bay window, I could see people mingling with glasses in hand. A catered affair, no doubt. I stepped out of the car, heels clicking softly against the stone path. My breath fogged the air. The envelope in my purse felt heavier than it should have, as if it carried not just the letter, but years of silence and swallowed pride. When I rang the bell, I heard music, Frank Sinatra singing, "Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas." Fitting. A song about pretending to be okay, even when everything's falling apart. The door opened. Sophie was the first to see me. Her expression froze between a smile and confusion, then settled into the same polished cordiality she wore at church fundraisers. "Rebecca," she said. "Not Mom, not even, hi. I wasn't expecting you." "No one ever does," I replied, stepping past her before she could block the entrance. The room was beautiful. A tall, fresh pine tree stood in the corner, decked in white and gold ornaments. The smell of cinnamon and roasted ham filled the air. People stood in clusters, neighbors, work colleagues, maybe even friends from Sophie's charity board. But as I walked in, the air shifted. Conversations faltered, eyes turned. I was the unexpected variable. Ethan came out of the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel. He saw me and stopped mid-step. "Mom." His voice was cautious, almost guilty. I smiled gently. "Merry Christmas, Ethan." Richard stood by the fireplace, a glass of something dark in his hand. He didn't look surprised. In fact, he looked ready, like he'd been waiting for the second act of a show he assumed he'd already stolen. "You're quite bold," he said calmly, raising his glass slightly toward me. "I learned from the best," I said, matching his gaze. I walked slowly toward the tree, pretending to admire it. But I noticed something instantly: the silver bell. It hung low, almost hidden in the back of the tree. Its red ribbon was frayed now, but the small, engraving EL8 still glinted under the lights. I didn't touch it. Not yet. Sophie followed me with a glass of wine, clearly trying to maintain appearances. "Can I get you something to drink?" "I won't stay long," I said, taking a small folded piece of paper from my purse. "Then why are you here?" Ethan asked, his voice tight. "To deliver something," I said simply. I turned to him, to Sophie, and finally to Richard. I held out the envelope. "I'm not here to cause a scene. This is for you." Richard took it before Ethan could. He opened it, read the letter's header, and his face hardened. Sophie leaned over his shoulder, gasping audibly. "You can't be serious." "I am," I said. "You came here, on Christmas." Ethan's tone cracked. "You told me I wasn't family," I said softly. "So I came as a creditor." The silence was thunderous. I could feel the room watching, some curious, some awkward, a few clearly amused. I turned to leave, but paused at the tree. I reached out and gently lifted the silver bell, held it for a moment. Then I laid it on the mantel, just beneath the framed photo of their perfect little family, one I no longer belonged to. "You don't have to remember," I whispered, not looking back. "But I won't let you forget." And then I walked out, calm, measured. While behind me, the echo of the envelope being dropped onto the hardwood floor rang louder than any carol ever could. I didn't just come with a letter, I came with truth. The folder sat quietly in my bag as I stood among champagne flutes and sugar cookies, pretending for a moment that the people in this room hadn't forgotten the hands that once fed them. But I hadn't come to pretend. I had come to correct a story. Sophie hovered near me, her mouth smiling but her eyes twitching. Richard had retreated to the far side of the room, whispering to a man in a cashmere scarf. Ethan hadn't spoken since I handed over the envelope. I saw him staring into the fire, as if looking for something he couldn't quite name. I walked slowly toward the grand dining table, set for 16, covered in white and gold and trimmed pine. At the center stood a towering arrangement of holly and eucalyptus. It smelled expensive, but it couldn't mask what I brought with me. From my tote, I pulled 14 manila folders, each one labeled neatly with a gold sticker. Inside were copies of checks, wire transfer logs, itemized receipts, photo stills from Sophie's Instagram posts geotagged from their lake house, and most importantly, notarized confirmation of the forged power of attorney Richard had filed 3 years ago. The same one that gave him temporary control over a portion of my accounts when I was recovering from surgery. I didn't speak right away. I made eye contact with each person as I handed them a folder. Neighbors, colleagues, even the pastor from their church. Some accepted it with polite confusion. Others hesitated, glancing toward Ethan for cues. He looked frozen. Sophie kept shifting her weight from one heel to another. Richard remained still, arms crossed. I returned to the head of the table, picked up the last folder, my own, and cleared my throat. "I'm Rebecca Lane," I began, my voice calm but steady. "And what I'm handing you tonight isn't an accusation. It's a correction." No one moved. You may have seen an article recently that portrayed me as unstable, confused, unreliable. I was called erratic for not showing up to pick up relatives at the airport. A murmur passed through a group near the sideboard. I want to be clear, none of this is for revenge. I'm simply presenting the part of the story that wasn't included in print. People began flipping through the pages. I saw furrowed brows, gasps, whispered exchanges. And then, someone, Mr. Douglas, Ethan's old high school science teacher, pointed at a page and said, "This is Richard's signature on the property refinance." Sophie's face went pale. "And this," Mrs. Navarro added, "is a wire from Rebecca's account to their design firm. That's $30,000? The air fractured. Conversations splintered. I stepped back as the tension finally snapped like a dry branch underfoot. "I'm not asking for your judgment," I said, watching Sophie start to cry. "But I will not let silence rewrite the past." Richard slammed his glass on a nearby counter. "You're humiliating your son on Christmas," he growled, stepping forward. "No, Richard," I said, still not raising my voice. "You did that. I'm just turning on the lights." The silence afterward was deafening. Even the music had stopped. I picked up the final folder, one I hadn't distributed, and placed it gently at Ethan's spot at the head of the table. "This one's yours," I told him. "It has the deed in my name, the mortgage termination date, and the statement showing the last 6 years of payments, all made from the account you said I liked to control." He didn't reach for it. I didn't wait. I turned, walked toward the foyer, and took one last look at the silver bell that still hung on the tree. This time, I didn't touch it. I had already rung loud enough. As I stepped out into the snow, I didn't slam the door. I didn't make a scene. But behind me, the air cracked, not with the sound of argument, but with the quiet crumble of a carefully constructed lie. And that was enough. 2 months had passed since Christmas night. The snow had long melted, but the frost between us remained. I hadn't heard a word from Ethan, or Sophie, or Richard. But silence is not the same as stillness. I knew something would break eventually, because when you cut the wrong wire in a tangled system, the rest of it doesn't fall immediately. It frays, and then collapses. It started with a letter, not to me, but to them. The mortgage payment I had been covering for over 6 years, $3,200 every month, was no longer being made. I had terminated the auto draft the night Ethan told me I wasn't welcome for Christmas. I'd waited 2 billing cycles, and now the bank sent the first formal notice of default. Sophie called the bank before she called Ethan. I know because I had listed their account under my name originally. The records were still accessible to me, legally. That's the thing about kindness when it's used as currency. It always leaves a receipt. From what I gathered, she'd assumed it was a banking glitch. She was frantic. Her voice on the call was sharp, anxious, and increasingly desperate. Her words overlapped, rushed with half-truths about our usual donor and unexpected changes. But the bank was clear. Payments had stopped, and the grace period was over. By the time she called Ethan, he was already checking the account. The auto draft line was gone. His face, I imagine, wasn't angry but hollow, because even fools know when the well has run dry. Sophie left a voicemail on my phone. She didn't scream, she didn't curse. She just said, "You've made your point." She didn't realize I hadn't made it yet. Later that week, rumors began to swirl. Not from me, from the people at the party who had received the folders. One of them, Jason Todd, the commercial real estate developer, was particularly disturbed to find out Richard had used forged credentials to vouch for a project they'd both backed years ago. Jason didn't speak to the press. He spoke to his investors. Within 10 days, Richard was quietly removed from 2 advisory boards. Clara lost her seat on the Historical Preservation Council, not because I demanded it, but because people who fund reputations tend not to back liars, especially ones who manipulate grieving widows for their personal gain. At a gala in mid-March, Richard tried to make a statement during a silent auction. I wasn't there, but a friend told me he spoke of loyalty and misguided family narratives. His voice trembled when someone in the back asked, "What about the power of attorney, Richard?" No one defended him. I imagined Ethan watching this unfold from behind a screen. I pictured him staring at the eviction warning on their kitchen table, while Sophie scrolled through old photos, each one taken in the living room I had helped pay for. I wondered if they ever looked at the bell on their Christmas tree and remembered the 8-year-old boy who once believed his mother was the safest place in the world, but I didn't dwell on it. Because meanwhile, I was planting, not flowers, but beginnings. I signed the papers to reclaim full ownership of the small property in Vermont I'd kept in my name, the one Ethan never knew existed. I filed the paperwork to open a small foundation for women over 50 who had experienced financial betrayal within their own families. I called it Bell and Birch, after the ornament Ethan once loved, and the tree under which I'd scattered my husband's ashes. They may have thought they buried me in shame, but the truth is, I'd only been quiet, not defeated. When the final foreclosure notice was mailed to Ethan's address, I wasn't gloating. I was sipping tea by the window, watching 2 redbirds pick at seeds I'd left for them, and I said aloud, without bitterness or pride, just clarity. They were right. Christmas is for family, but not all family is chosen, and not all family stays. I didn't send the letter, I didn't need to. Some things are better learned the hard way, and some debts only time can collect. It was late March when I heard the knock, not forceful, just hesitant, like a rhythm played by someone unsure if they were welcome. I knew it was Ethan before I even opened the door. He stood there, hands buried in the pockets of a coat that looked too thin for the wind. His eyes were sunken, not tired, just emptied. The kind of look that says a man's been walking inside his own silence for too long. "Mom," he said, voice cracking around the single word. I didn't invite him in. Not because I was angry, but because the threshold between us wasn't a door. It was history. He shifted, as if waiting for me to speak. When I didn't, he did. I didn't come to make excuses, he said. And I know I've lost the right to ask for anything, but I needed to say, "I'm sorry," I nodded slightly, let the words settle without rescuing him from the discomfort they deserved. "I believed things I shouldn't have," he continued, eyes down. "I let Sophie and Dad's memory, and maybe my own pride, tell me that your help was some kind of control. But it wasn't. You gave, and I took. For too long." He looked up. "I read every page of what you left that night. Every receipt. Every document. Every line. I didn't know half of it." "That," I said quietly, "was the problem." He looked like he wanted to cry, but couldn't. Like he didn't know if he was allowed to. Then he did something unexpected. He reached into his coat and pulled out the silver bell. I blinked. It looked smaller now, or maybe I had grown. "I found it under the tree after you left," he said, voice shaking. "I thought Sophie had tossed it, but I couldn't throw it away." I stepped aside, letting him walk in. The living room hadn't changed much, except maybe for how empty it felt, now that so much had been emptied from me. Expectations, grief, the fantasy that love alone was enough to hold a family together. We sat down, opposite ends of the couch, like two people who had once known each other well, and now were trying to learn again. He looked at the bell in his hand, then held it out. "I don't know what this means anymore," he whispered. "But I think it still means something." I didn't take it from him. Instead, I reached to the drawer beside me, opened it, and pulled out the second one. He froze. "You have it?" "I never hung it again," I said. "Not since your father passed. It felt too loud for the kind of quiet I had to live with." He stared at both bells for a long time. Then I placed mine gently back into the drawer and looked at him. Not as a mother aching for her son, but as a woman who had found herself again after being lost in the maze of sacrifice. I took his hand, the one still holding his bell, and curled his fingers around it. And then I said the line I had rehearsed in my mind every night since Christmas. Not with bitterness, not with triumph, but with clarity. "I'm not leaving you, Ethan. I never did. But I'm not leaving myself behind anymore either." His tears fell, silent and warm. The kind of tears that don't ask to be seen. The kind that wash rather than demand. We didn't speak after that. I didn't ask about Sophie, or the house, or what he would do next. That wasn't mine to carry anymore. Before he left, he turned and said, "If I can fix it, any of it, I will." I nodded once, and then I closed the door behind him, not to shut him out, but to finally let myself in. I thought, perhaps naively, that silence would follow, that people would let the story dissolve into their busy lives like steam from a winter kettle. But I had forgotten one thing. Nothing stays quiet in a small town, especially not when it involves a family people thought they understood. It started with whispers at the post office. I heard she ambushed them at dinner, on Christmas Eve no less. I heard she planned it for weeks, that she printed files like a corporate spy. And then the local Facebook group caught wind. One woman posted a status, no names of course. "I understand financial betrayal hurts. But do we destroy our children's reputations for it? What happened to forgiveness?" It got over 200 likes. Below, someone replied, "You clearly never had your son steal from you and make you feel like a stranger in the home you paid for." And just like that, the war began. I didn't respond. I didn't defend myself. But I read every comment, every word. Some stung like tiny cuts. Others, surprisingly, healed something I didn't realize still bled. One woman messaged me privately. "I saw what they did. My own daughter tricked me into signing over my house years ago. You gave me the courage to speak up." Another wrote, "I was at that dinner. And I'll be honest, I felt uncomfortable. Not because you were wrong, but because you forced truth into a room built on lies." But not everyone saw it that way. A man I once knew from church left a voicemail. "Rebecca, I don't know what's gotten into you. You used to be the picture of grace. Now, you look vindictive. You should have handled this behind closed doors." I deleted it without listening twice. But then came the phone call from Mrs. Kennedy, my old neighbor and someone I always respected. "Dear," she said gently, "I think you were right to protect yourself, but I also think you may have burned bridges that could have been rebuilt." I didn't answer right away, because part of me agreed with her, but another part, the part that remembered Christmas mornings alone while they toasted champagne in my house, knew this wasn't just about bridges. It was about boundaries. And sometimes, to build anything new, you have to tear down what's rotten. Still, the doubt crept in, quietly, like fog under a door. Did I overstep? Did I go too far? Then I saw it. A video clip. Not mine, but of a podcast. Two women talking about toxic family structures and the silent epidemic of financial abuse among elders. One of them said, "Just because it's family doesn't mean it's right. Silence protects the abuser, not the victim." And just like that, the fog lifted. Because it was never about revenge. It was about truth. About drawing a line in the sand and finally saying, "No more." Yes, some thought I was harsh. Yes, some dinners would forever be awkward. But others wrote me letters, left flowers on my porch, shared their own stories of being used, dismissed, pushed aside. They didn't call me cruel. They called me brave. It happened on a Thursday morning, quiet, ordinary, like any other. I was watering my lavender plants when the first email came in. Subject line, "Thought you should see this." Attached was a link to an online article from a local investigative blog. The headline read, "Full audio from Lane family's Christmas dinner reveals stunning truth." I clicked, and there it was, my voice, calm and deliberate, echoing through the speakers. This is the part of the story the media left out. The part where I paid for the mortgage, the renovations, the tuition. The part where you asked me to disappear so you could rewrite the guest list of your life. The recording lasted 14 minutes. Enough time for listeners to hear gasps, denials. The moment Ethan stammered, "Mom, I didn't know you kept all this." And then Richard's voice, low, defensive. It was for the family's image. No one wants to read about an old woman being generous. They want a clean, perfect narrative. By noon, the article had been shared over 20,000 times. Comments flooded in beneath it. She deserved better. This is why we record everything these days. Family doesn't mean unconditional access to someone's bank account. Rebecca Lane, wherever you are, thank you. My hands trembled as I scrolled. And then, another email. This time from a former colleague at the county records office. "Thought you might want to know, Patricia Moore is being investigated by the ethics board. Apparently, she pushed through a property reassessment under Richard's request last summer. All undocumented." I stared at the screen. Patricia Moore, my old friend, the same woman who wrote that false snowstorm article, had overstepped. And now the cracks were showing. That evening, the news confirmed it. City official under scrutiny for conflict of interest. Source, leaked Christmas dinner recording. The tide had turned. Over the next few days, my voicemail filled with apologies. Some were mumbled, others more genuine. Sophie left a message I listened to twice. "Rebecca, I was wrong. About so much. I think I let the comfort you gave us turn into entitlement. I don't expect forgiveness, but I do want to say thank you, even if I never said it before." I didn't cry, not right away, but when I passed by the silver bell on my hallway shelf, the one Ethan and I hung up every Christmas when he was little, I paused. I reached out, touched it. It was colder than I remembered, but it still rang clear. Outside, the snow had begun to fall again. Soft, unannounced, like grace. I thought about the guest who had recorded the dinner, someone I didn't even know well. And yet, they had seen the truth. Not just facts, not just numbers, but me. The woman behind the crazy headline. The mother behind the smile. I will never know why they shared the audio. Maybe it was conscience. Maybe it was justice. But in that one quiet act, something shifted. Not just in the public's perception, but in my own. Because for once, the story didn't get twisted to favor the ones with louder voices or cleaner suits. For once, the truth was loud enough. And that truth didn't scream or blame. It simply existed. Documented, heard, and most importantly, believed. The apartment smelled like cinnamon and pine. For the first time in years, it wasn't from a store-bought candle, but from actual cinnamon sticks simmering on the stove, and fresh pine branches I clipped myself from the tree outside. I had opened the curtains wider than usual that morning. The winter sun streamed in softer than I remembered, and the light hit the kitchen tiles like an old friend returning after a long absence. It had been weeks since the recording went public, long enough for the calls to slow, for the news to move on to other stories. But for me, the shift wasn't in headlines. It was in the silence that followed. The kind of silence that didn't ache. I had started making small changes to the apartment. Nothing dramatic, just things that made it feel like mine again. I replaced the stiff, oversized dining table with a round oak one I found at a secondhand shop. I refinished it myself, sanding it down late into the night with music playing low in the background. Every stroke reminded me that my hands were still capable, still building. And then came the bell. The silver one Ethan and I had always hung on the tree when he was little. It had spent the last 6 years shoved in a box, dull and forgotten. I took it out this morning, polished it until my reflection smiled back at me, and hung it near the top of the tree. This time, I didn't cry, I just paused, letting the memory rise without dragging me under. That evening, Marian Torres arrived with her family, her wife Julia, and their teenage son, Milo. They came bearing a casserole, a bottle of red wine, and a stack of mismatched dessert plates that instantly reminded me of my childhood kitchen. They laughed when they stepped inside. "This place is so warm," Julia said, setting down her coat. "It smells like real Christmas." "It's the cinnamon," I smiled. "And the company." We sat around the new table. Marian told a story about her first case in law school. Milo chimed in with a sarcastic comment about algebra, and Julia offered to help me repaint the hallway next weekend. I didn't feel like I was hosting. I felt like I belonged. After dessert, Milo wandered to the tree and pointed to the silver bell. "This one looks different," he said. I nodded. "It's the oldest ornament I have. My son and I used to hang it together. It means promises made in good faith." He didn't say anything, just nodded and walked back to the table. And then something happened I didn't expect. I laughed. Not a polite chuckle, a real laugh. The kind that starts in your chest and makes you lean back without apology. It came after Julia spilled a bit of whipped cream on her shirt and pretended it was haute couture. And for that moment, everything else, headlines, betrayal, old wounds, blurred at the edges. After they left, I stood in the doorway for a long time, watching the snow fall again, quiet, steady, and for the first time in a very, very long time, I didn't feel alone. I felt home. Before we say goodbye, I want to leave you with something. I'm Rebecca Lane, and this is the first Christmas in 6 years where I'm not holding my breath, not waiting for a phone call, not wondering if someone remembered me, not forcing a smile at a table I paid for but was never truly welcome at. This year, the table is smaller, but full. The bell is still here, still silver, still slightly dented at the top. But this year, it rings for something new. When I look back at everything, the loans I gave, the silence I accepted, the smile I wore even when I was breaking inside, I don't feel shame anymore. I feel gratitude. Because I needed to go through that to remember something I forgot. That justice may come late, but when it arrives, you'll hear it loud and clear, like a knock on your door, like the sound of your own voice finally saying, "No more." Or maybe, like a bell, software gentle, but unmistakable. I didn't just fight for money. I fought for the right to choose myself again. To say, I belong here, not because someone lets me in, but because I remember who I am. I hope, wherever you're listening to this from, you feel that too. Maybe you're watching from your living room, with a cup of coffee and the sun just rising. Maybe it's late at night, and stories like this are the only company you've had in a while. I see you, and I want you to know, it's not too late to begin again. To stand up, even if your hands are shaking. To ring your own bell, even if no one else hears it right away. This isn't just a story about revenge. It's about rebuilding, brick by brick, memory by memory. It's about knowing when to fight and when to let go. And if it touched you, please consider subscribing, not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of something gentler, wiser, stronger. A place where we believe in kindness, in justice, in second chances. Tonight, as laughter fills my kitchen, as Marion pours another glass of wine and the tree glows with soft lights, I know I didn't just win a battle. I reclaimed a life, my life. And when I pass that little silver bell, it rings, not for pain, but for peace. So, wherever you are right now, take this story with you. And remember, sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. It waits quietly until you're ready to open your heart. Take care, and I'll see you in the next story.